Today, by popular request, we are drawing Withered Bonnie from Five Nights at Freddy's in 4 different styles, but we're doing it with a little bit of a twist. You're going to watch my art journey through this drawing, and you're going to learn all the tips and tricks to get better, not only at art, but all these different styles. So let's get to it. The 4 styles that we have today are realistic, cartoon, puzzle, and cracked. Let's start off with the puzzle effect. The biggest thing to consider with puzzle effect is to consider each individual piece. This is how I'm drawing it in real time. I'm taking my time to mentally map out where I want each puzzle piece to fit within the character. Now, not every puzzle piece is going to fit very cleanly and very uniquely. A lot of them are going to be very ambiguous shapes, sometimes half cut off shapes, kind of like the corner edge of a puzzle. But that's okay, because it's supposed to give the essence of looking like puzzle pieces, not the entire thing just being a puzzle. Also, for this section, I'm using a H pencil. It's a very light pencil. I don't really need it to be that dark because I'm going to go over it with ink. I just need a guideline, if you will. I don't want to scratch the paper too much, because if I scratch the paper too much and then I go to color over it, you're going to see all these little hidden lines. It might not pick up on camera, but to your eye, it actually will. Now on to the next step, and that's going to be the inking. For the inking, I go with 2 different ways. I use a much bolder cartoon style outline, and this is good for most beginners and most intermediate. You can advance this the more you want, the more artistic flair you want to add into, and also your artistic level. If you are a younger artist or if you're new to art, then you might not be able to have certain control of certain things, so I would recommend using a Posca. It's a much more bolder outline, there's less curvature there. But if you're looking to up it and you want to start making it a little bit more advanced, this is where we're going to use a bolder outline, and I like a wide ink brush, and this is key because I like to have that crisp, bold cartoon outline. But when I do the puzzle pieces, as you'll see later, I want to use a much thinner, so I'm going to use a much thinner brush. You can even use a fine liner. It's all up to you. I would recommend, though, that if you're a beginner, I'd probably wait to use the puzzle piece outlines later after you colored in, just in case you happen to mess things up. And now we're onto the fine liner, and once again, take your time. See how slow I am moving? I really want to make sure that my hand is not drawing the line, but rather my arm. Only for the circles do I like to use my hand. Most drawing actually starts in your arm and in your shoulder. It does not start in your hand. Sketching is primarily done with your hand. But if you want tight, smooth lines, then I highly recommend using more of your arm and your shoulder to execute them. You'll find that you have much more control. Erase away any faint lines, and we're on to the next part, which is coloring it in. Another good tip is make sure you set all of your colors up ahead of time. A lot of times I can find that, at least when I'm teaching, is they'll try to find every color while they're working, and that can get often distracting. It can make you feel mentally bogged down. So whenever I'm coloring anything in, I like to have all of my colors set up either next to me or somewhere that's easily accessible, so that way I can just quickly hop from whatever color I need to go through to the next. And now for this next part, it's basically like treating it like a coloring book. But once again, there is nothing to be rushed here. If you mess up, it's a lot harder at this point to clean things up without changing the puzzle piece altogether. We also want to make sure that we are adjusting for where all the light is. So I will choose lighter colors on one side and darker colors for the puzzle pieces on the other side. And that's because essentially what I want to do is still create a 3-dimensional object in a cartoon style, but yet making it look 3-dimensional by varying up all these little colors. And before we get too far into this video, and I know it's going to be a little bit longer than what I normally do, if you like this version of the content where I'm explaining in depth my process, then please do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. We're almost at 200K, and it would mean a lot to me if we can get to there before August. So again, if you like the content, do me a favor, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Now let's finish up with puzzle pieces. As we finish up with the puzzle pieces, it is important to understand where your light source is coming from and where you should keep all of your colors. So for me, the light source is going to be coming from the middle and to the left. So my lighter hues are going to be on the left, middle towards the middle, obviously, and my darker hues are going to be towards the right and in towards the back, underneath the chin, etc. I don't want it to just be blue, light blue, dark blue, randomly splotched. I want it to have some cohesion. With the puzzle pieces complete, it's time to move to the cartoon style. And for the cartoon style, I basically wanted to keep very similar elements that I was talking about with the puzzle pieces, except there are some things to learn from the cartoon style, and that is thick, bold outlines and rounded shapes. See, with cartoons, they often don't have a lot of sharp lines to them unless it's a very specific type of art style, like the Fairly Odd Parents. That comes to mind, Invader Zim. But for the most part, classical cartoon style is really thick, bold lines, bright, vibrant colors, and over-exaggerated forms. So these are things to consider. They're also usually only 2 to 3 colors at most. So what I mean by that is they only have one base tone and then either a highlight or a shadow, very rarely both, unless it's a really highly done cartoon. For instance, if you look at early Simpsons and early Family Guy, you'll see that they had really flat, matte color with almost no shading. Then as the seasons got on and production values went up, they did have a more three-dimensional look, but they still kept their two-dimensional shapes. So again, it is important to note that do not just rush into the flat color. Do take your time, make sure that the color is down correctly, make sure it's done with a sense of intent. Don't just slather it on. You want to make sure that the shadows are in the right spot and the highlights are all in the right spot. If you need to take time and look at your reference, or if you're creating a character for yourself, then do make sure you take the time to plot out where everything is. And we're finishing up the cartoon style, and I'm going to be using the Posca specifically. Now, you saw that I used alcohol markers when I was doing the cartoon originally, but the Poscas give me such a beautiful thick black line that I just absolutely love it. And now we're going to head on to the cracked effect. For the cracked effect, I'm going to basically work exactly how I did with the puzzle pieces. I'm going to use my H pencil and add in all these nice little squiggly lines. Now, the beautiful thing with this effect is that you can add as little or as many cracks as you want. I often like to add a lot more with the FNAF characters, mainly because, well, they are highly cracked and damaged, and that's why we have Rune. So I really want them to kind of look like they've been damaged, like they've been put through the ringer. So I will add all sorts of little cracks throughout. Once you've done the amount of cracks that you like, we're going to go on to the erasing, where you're going to just erase away all the dead sections within the sketch. For the next step, we're going to use a kneaded eraser, and we're just going to gently roll across the drawing itself. This will pick up all of the loose graphite without erasing away the drawing completely. Now, for me, the next part, I like to do the inking first. And you can do the inking later. I just find that you will not bleed too much into the color if you do the inking first. So basically, I just do all the thick, boldest lines first, mainly your outline first. This way I can set up and see where all the cracks are, and also it gives you a better idea of the overall composition, so that way when you go over everything and you add your cracks, it makes things a lot easier. Another really good thing about this effect that I really like is you can add layers of artistic nature to it. So as you're seeing here, I'm going to add a lot more black and a lot more of the underpainting with the inks. I wanted to give it a subtle layer of 3-dimension, but not fully. I don't want it to be too realistic. I'm going to keep all 3 of these sections kind of in a similar cartoon vibe and leave the realistic tutorial for the end. Once all of your outlining is complete, one thing that you really want to make sure that you get done right away is to outline with your darkest area, whatever your darkest colors are, up against all of your cracked lines. This will help so that way you don't bleed over into the non-cracked areas or other affected areas. So this way when you color it in, it makes it more of a coloring book, it makes it a lot seamless, it makes it a lot easier for you. I know I'm repeating myself a lot when I say this, but take your time when you're coloring. One thing that can ruin a great sketch is bad coloring. If you just go over things really fast and don't take your time and just rush through things, then you are going to have muddy colors, you're going to have streaks all over if you're using alcohol markers, and if you're using Posca, well then you could easily either A, damage your tips and ink will come flying out, or you're going to just wind up chewing through the paper because you're going to rush through it so quickly. So always take your time, especially with all these unique effects. This isn't just like a graphite sketch. These are different. They got nuance to them, and you want to make sure that you take the time and treat each section with the proper respect, because if you do not, you will ruin all of your drawings. And we don't want to ruin our drawings, we want to elevate, we want to make our things better. Another important thing to think about is your 3 tones, your middle tone, your highlight, and your shadow, or your darkest tones. In this case, I want to make sure that all of my dark tones are closer to the cracks. I want to make sure that each of the highlights are also well represented, because even though these are dull, beaten down character that is Withered Bonnie also has tons of little crevices of highlights. Because of all the dark cracks, there's also going to be all these nice little tiny highlights that just pop up all over the place. So what we want to do is make sure that we give each moment its little bit of attention to detail. So as you can see, I'm popping in all these nice little highlights just to give it that extra little bit of detail. Even in the wires here, you want to make sure that they have just a little bit of highlight, a little bit of darkness, and it'll add just that extra layer of detail, which can make or break just how awesome a drawing can be. Though, no matter what you guys create, I know it's going to be awesome, so just have a little bit of faith. Now, here's a little bit of a problem. I kind of intentionally went over just so I can give you a teaching point. As you can see, a lot of these things were all of a sudden just bled over. So what we can do is actually use it to our advantage and make little micro cracks out of this. By going over the little affected areas where it bled over into the paper, I can now basically add in all of my little spider web lines for all my little cracks, and now I got little wonderful crack lines to add in, and it looks like it's just been a broken piece, and you will never know the difference that, oops, I accidentally let it bleed into the paper. This is a great way to clean up any mistakes. This is why I don't like adding a very thick crack line, because you always want to be able to go over it later just in case you mess up. And like Bob Ross says, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents. Again, with the crack lines, you can add as many or as little as you like. I prefer to add a lot because I really want it to look damaged and ruined as much as I can, but once again, to each their own, do as much or as little as you like. And now we're on to the final section of the realistic side. Now this is something that I do get a very, very large request for, and that is how to draw realistic characters. How do I draw realism? How do I make something look 3D? And this is going to be the harsh reality that you might not want to hear, but is almost necessary to hear. Realism is hard. Yeah, I know, really big shocker. This is like breaking down the walls of intelligence here. But realism is really hard. It takes time. It's studying. It's learning. It's a lot of processing of nature and a lot of things that you'll have to see. Shapes, forms, color, etc. A combination of all of those things will what make or break a really realistic portrait. But the good thing is here are some tips and tricks that I use that will help you elevate your realism game. I love using these Tombow brush pens. Now, I actually have several of them. One is going to be very pungent and very dark, and then the others are just going to be basically when the ink slowly starts to fade, you get this beautiful gray transition. So as they start to quote-unquote fade and die out, you can get all these beautiful gray variations, and then you can almost use them like you would a paintbrush and treat it like you would an underpainting. So what I do here is first establish my darkest darks. And that's because you're not going to get much darker than what I want to establish. It's going to give the basic essence of the form this way, and then we're going to work in layers of gray. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh man, I don't have those specific pens. Well, here's the wonderful thing. With almost any alcohol marker that you use, there's going to be sets of gray. If you like using warm tones, then use warm tones. If you like using cool tones, I generally like using cool gray tones. That's because I love adding a lot of horror and creepy elements to my drawings, which genuinely would be more of the cooler tones. Things that are more livelier or more energetic, I feel are better with warmer tones. So if you don't have these specific Tombow brush pens, well then you can just use a series of gray alcohol markers in varying textures and then just work from there. But I would say start light, and you can always add in layers over the top. Basically, we're going to treat this like a gradation. We want the entire piece to be nicely grayed all throughout. This is what I always call in all of my other videos the cheat code. By doing this, we're going to establish all of our darkest darks, we're going to establish all of our tones, so meaning mid-tone, light tones, shadows, highlights, etc. We're going to establish our darkest darks, our lightest lights, and our beautiful transitional blends. So that way, all we gotta do is just slap on some color, and boom, you already have half of the realism done. But before we slap any of this color down, there is something that is very important to understand, and that is you want to make sure that all of your ink thoroughly dries. And I don't mean just, oh, like it's been done. No, like it's good to let it sit for about a good 5 to 10 minutes after you've done all of your inking, because fundamentally it is still paper. We don't want to stress it too much. If you start applying a lot of layers of either Poscas or alcohol markers or any type of ink wash, etc., it's going to warp the paper, it's going to tear up the paper, and you're not going to be able to get all the fundamental blends that you'd like to get through in any kind of drawing. So, first step, let everything really dry. Then, what I like to do in any of my drawings is after I've kind of mapped out all of the grays, I will work in my color pencils. I leave the acrylic paint pens and all the other paint pen work that you're starting to see now to the very end, because it's so vibrant and so stark by comparison that I really want to make sure that that is used sparingly. Where I can use a color pencil to get a beautiful blend, I will not use too much of my acrylic paint pens, because as you can see, look how bold that black is against the ink. It really is stark. In fact, so much so that I actually had to go over with another layer of black just to kind of thin it out. But I want you to see just how receded it is, and the only way to do that is with the acrylic paint pens. So now we can add all the nice little color pencil work, and this is more of a technique thing. Because Withered Bonnie is an animatronic and there's lots of rust, I like to use these sides to do a lot of shading. So I'll use the side of my pencil, and I allow for all that nice little textures that you see on the paper itself. I want that to get all picked up. I want to use it to my advantage. It gives the aesthetic of gnarled chipped metal and little rivets that are all just bunched in, and all the pithing of the metal, and that's the technical term for when metal rusts and kind of gets all the little bumpy textures. So I will bounce between a light and a dark, a mid-tone, and I'll bounce back and forth, but I usually, once again, have my colors set up ahead of time. So that way, as you can see, I use stuff sparingly. I go light with my color pencils. And I'll blend where needed, but generally speaking, I'm going to bounce back and forth between all of my colors. I want everything to be used sparingly and softly. Let all the colors just get nice and smoothly blended. Then with a little bit of fining touches, once again, we're going to go in with our paint pens, and we are just going to use it sparingly. Because even though it does dry lighter, we don't want to overpower all this beautiful detail. We do want to hit where all these soft little highlights would hit. And I know this is a little bit bigger video than I normally do, but thank you so much for stopping by. I do want you to know that if you like this content, please do me a favor, hit that like button and hit that subscribe button. Which side was your favorite? Thank you so much. This has been an undertaking, but a really fun undertaking. So thank you all for stopping by, and as always, I shall see you all in the next video.